Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Spirituality has existed since the beginning of human tribes. Quantum physics is a relatively new concept in comparison. What do they have to do with each other? Mission Evolution Radio Show is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone TV channel, xztv.ca. With us this hour to explore the concept of spirituality and quantum physics is Peter Canova. Peter is an international businessman who, after a series of life-changing spiritual experiences, began studying and writing on spirituality and consciousness. He's the author of the 25-time award-winning First Souls Trilogy and has contributed to the popular Chicken Soup for the Soul series. His latest book is entitled Quantum Spirituality. His website, petercanova.com. Peter, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Nice to be here.
It's nice to have you on again. So I take it you're not a quantum physicist. So how did you become interested in quantum physics and spirituality?
When I was in my 20s, I had a series of very vivid spiritual, or psychic experiences, however you want to call it. And I found out I was a very accurate medical intuitive, which was pretty surprising to me. And I diagnosed hundreds of cases successfully. Very soon, when I put aside the disbelief, it opened up a whole series of things: remote viewing, psychokinesis, premonitions, clairvoyance, clairaudience. I started having these, I guess what you'd call otherworldly experiences. And being a Capricorn, I wasn't just satisfied to have the experiences. I kind of wanted to understand the nuts and bolts behind it. Like, how does this happen? I came to the conclusion very early on that the only way that I could see what was happening to somebody else by only being given their name, age, and address meant that we had to be connected at some level. We all have to be connected at some level that we're not really perceiving with our everyday senses. So it led me to, from spirituality, from studying ancient spiritual texts, it led me to quantum physics. And the nexus there is that both quantum physics and spirituality deal essentially with the nature of light, matter, energy, and consciousness. Those are the things that they really have in common when you really boil it down to what they're both aiming to understand.
So when you started having these experiences as a Capricorn, you probably pretty grounded, and it must have been a bit shocking for you. Did you go ahead and get any training to hone your skills?
Not really. Very rudimentary. I discovered the medical intuitive aspect, which was actually in a course. It was called Silva Mind Control back then. Some people who are as ancient as I am might remember that, but but that was only about a week-long thing, and after that, I was pretty much on my own. Although I will say that I was living overseas, and I started to have people like in Africa, what they would call bush doctors, who were shamans. And I had an East Indian guy. They would literally come up to me from out of nowhere in the street and start talking to me and telling me things about my life. And I was thinking, wow, were these people sent to help guide me along my journey? Because I was trying to figure all this stuff out. And it just reaffirmed the fact that there's something else going on out there that at a level that we don't normally perceive, because these people literally just came into my life unsolicited and started talking to me as if they had known me for years. It was kind of weird. I did go eventually to London to the British Spiritualist Association to get some help, because it was like almost like a faucet that was turned on and running and you couldn't stop it. I needed to control the spigot there. And I was just getting inundated with impressions. I would, touch somebody and I'd know a whole bunch about their history and background and their relationships and In conversations, I'd know things 10 minutes in advance before they would happen. I remember I was carrying a huge dossier, probably about 200 pages, when I was in Africa on a plane for a business meeting. And I got off the plane and I just saw one single page out of those 200 pages. And I said, wow, I think something fell out. I went back on the plane and sure enough, that one page was there. All these kind of things were happening to me. And it was actually having an effect on me, a physical effect on me, and emotional effect on me. So I did go to the British Spiritualist Association to try and seek some help there, because spirituality in Britain is much more well established and understood and accepted than it is really here in the United States. But not to any great extent did I receive training for this.
So you have a bit of a different slant on information. How would you define information in quantum and scientific terms?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because it's very important. Information is not abstract, and it's way more than just the conversation you and I are having. You know, Peter imparts information on Gwilda's show. It's far deeper than that. Information is the very heart or DNA of what creates our known universe. So the fact that you and I are talking over a computer, this is all happening from binary subatomic particles that are passing through the computer transistors in sequences, and they allow us to experience each other both visually and audibly. And the DNA in our bodies, for example, also is composed of binary sequences. You have adenine pairing with thymine and guanine pairing with cysteine, and that's what really is the backbone of the DNA that writes the code for our bodies. Well, very similar to having a code for our bodies, the information is present in the very subatomic particles of creation, the very things that make up our world. And the information, for instance, for example, I mean, the elements themselves, the subatomic particles combine in very specific ways to form very specific elements with the elemental table. We use electrons, which have up spin and down spin, again, in binary form, like zeros and ones going through a computer that they're using now to store information in quantum computing. Information is actually, to make it very simple for people to understand, information is always physical. It's not abstract. It's always delivered by physical means. It's encoded in subatomic particles. You might say, well, yeah, but Peter, you're giving information today. How's that physical? Well, it is, because the information is passing through neurons and synapses in my brain, and it's the sound of my voice. It's all happening on a molecular basis. The pen that you write and the ink that you use to put information on paper, again, that's all molecules of subatomic particles. And so information is concrete. It has physical form. It can be measured, and it is present in all of creation through the subatomic particles that make up our world. So I kind of liken it to the fact that information is the DNA of God, or the supreme intelligence that controls and directs and informs the world and creates all the repetitive and multitude forms that we see. So a dog is a dog, is a cat is a cat, and that's not an accident. That's coded just the way all the physical objects that we perceive in the world are coded through the action of light energy and subatomic particles.
So, Peter, when you're starting to access information about another person, or doing medical intuitive, which of course is accessing information, but you're not sitting down in front of a computer. You're not hooked into the zeros and ones. How are you receiving it? How does it come in?
It comes in images. I mean, it's different for different people. I've talked to other people about it. Edgar Cayce, for example, was called the Sleeping Prophet. And he was, among other things, a very accurate medical intuitive, but he was sort of in a trance kind of state, and it came to him in a trance state. With me, it came through my waking consciousness. I didn't have to go to sleep or go into any kind of hypnotic trance or anything. It just kind of flowed through. It would often take images. So I remember the very first case that I did. and of a person who had a medical issue, and they just gave me the person's name, age, and address. He was an elderly gentleman in Miami, and I remember seeing all of a sudden my attention was drawn to his heart area, and I saw his heart tilted at a rather odd angle, which was causing the aorta to be pinched. And I said, well, I think he has a blockage in his aorta. And they said, that's correct. What else can you tell us? And I said, well, I see something looks unnatural down the bottom quadrant of his heart. It looks artificial. I said, I believe he has a pacemaker. And they said, that's correct. Can you tell us what year the pacemaker was installed? I saw the hands of a clock moving wildly around, and then all of a sudden they stopped short at 10 o'clock, which indicated to me 10 years prior. So I said he had it installed 10 years ago, and they said that information is correct. So for me, these things came very much in the form of images.
Okay, so and that's consistent with information we get from dreams or information that the shaman get through trance states is allegory and metaphor. How can you be sure that you're translating it accurately if you're coming from allegory and metaphor?
Well, I mean, in the case of what I just cited you, the actual evidence was the fact that the documentation about this person's condition was present, was there. They weren't reading it to me. All they gave me was his name, age, and address, but they were able to verify everything I said by looking back at the documentation of his condition.
Right, right. I was just wondering, in general, do you always get the information, whether it's medical, intuitive, or otherwise? Does it tend to come to you in allegory and metaphor?
No, sometimes it comes quite literally. Sometimes it comes in ideas and sentences.
That's pretty interesting. And when it comes in sentences, is it like you're hearing voices, or what's that like?
Um, it's just like something speaking in my mind. I mean, I wrote my first book, Pope Annalisa, largely from this channeled information, and it came to me in sentences and phrases and things that I wanted to use in the book. And you know, I know specific parts in particular, and many people tell me that they found those the most impactful parts of the book.
So, if information, the information available to the masses is at best distorted, if not entirely false, what impact is this having on us?
Well, again, you know, information is one of those things that you can look at different levels. The information you're talking about, say, is stuff that you hear in the news or read in the newspapers. And yes, it's highly distorted, highly biased and distorted from both sides of the spectrum. But the only way, I guess, that you can discern what you feel is the truth is by having some kind of a connection with higher consciousness. And my book, Quantum Spirituality, that's really what it's about. It's about coaching people or giving people an incredibly deep information base of science and spiritual tradition.
Well,
As
we're going to have to pick up on the science and spiritual tradition on the other side of a station break. Peter and I will return very shortly, so don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Do science and spirit ever meet? With us is Peter Canova. Peter is the author of many books, including First Souls Trilogy and Quantum Spirituality. His website, petercanova.com. Peter, we were talking about the way information comes through to different people. And we were talking about allegory versus literal and how you hear it. You get a conversation going on in your mind. For those of us that think we might be getting information but aren't sure, how do we validate that? How do we know it's not just our imagination that we're hearing?
well, I think that the best way to validate that is by cultivating your own inner voice, which means contacting a higher source of consciousness, which really is us in a way at another dimension of being, because we're multi-dimensional creatures, but we're kind of spirits having a human experience here. So we do have an inner resource to draw on, and ultimately that inner resource is part of the supreme consciousness, call it God, whatever makes you comfortable, that is responsible for everything that is created. And the quantum spirituality, to me, really is using science and spirit as an X and Y axis for kind of checking things and validating things, and seeing that the information that we're getting from what we believe to be higher consciousness has validity. And it's a roadmap in a sense. So you can read books that are spiritual, and then you can read quantum physics treatises. In and of themselves, they're fine. They can contain valuable insights. But when you put them together, it gives you X and Y coordinates. It gives you an arena, in effect, within which you can operate, and you can cross-reference one with the other. So it gets the left brain and the right brain both involved. It gets your logical mind and your intuitive mind both involved and working together, and kind of balancing and checking each other. And quantum spirituality is really just that. It's a roadmap to having experiences with higher consciousness, using spirituality and using quantum physics as the indices, or the indicators of kind of how we're progressing.
So, but we don't have to be a quantum physicist to have good intuition.
No,
Um,
no, not at
you,
all.
do you find that understanding the basic principles of quantum physics helps with understanding your intuition?
Oh, it absolutely does. I mean, quantum physics and spirituality are basically two entrances to the same place. They ultimately, I mean, one of the things that I was really astounded at, and I've done a 35-year study of this, one of the things that I was really astounded with was how ancient spiritual texts, and in particular, I'm going to refer to the texts of the Gnostic Christians, who were an ancient Judeo-Christian mystical sect that really were the first Christians before they were destroyed by the Orthodox Catholic Church. And what I found was that their insights predicted almost every major theory of modern quantum physics: the Big Bang, parallel universes, the God particle, so forth. It was really quite astonishing, and in some cases, very literal, and almost indisputable, I would say. So when I started to see those connections, and I was connecting the dots, I was saying, okay, science and spirit, really, not religion. Okay, religion tends to be a little bit more dogmatic and boxed in. Spirituality is more open-ended and accepting, but spirituality and quantum physics are heading in the same direction. And I make that distinction. I made a distinction with Orthodox religion. I will also make a distinction with Orthodox science. Orthodox science can be just as limiting as Orthodox religion. And by Orthodox science, what I mean is that everything has a material cause, and they try and look for the explanation of the world around us from a material basis, and it just doesn't work. It makes no sense. It's far more. You get a far better understanding of how everything works in both quantum physics and the world at large by understanding that the creation was a top-down process of consciousness leading to physical experience, not some random physical particles clashing together and somehow forming consciousness.
So, which leads us to, what is the electrical universe?
Well, I call electrical universe a holographic universe. What science is, and quantum physics is leading towards, is the same vision that the Gnostic mystics had, which is that the universe is simply nothing more than a giant projection. It's a matrix. It's a projection that uses light energy, or uses electromagnetic means, light energy, to project the experience of a material world. And I mean, we could get into this deeply, but I don't want to really confuse people. There's several ways that they have, I won't say proven, but had strong indications that this is what the world may look like. It's like kind of like the holodeck on the old Star Trek series, where the crew members were for recreation would go down to the holodeck, and it was like an immersive virtual world where it was so real that sometimes they got confused and thinking, they were involved with the characters and thinking the characters were real. Well, that's kind of us in a way. We're like the programmers thinking we're part of the program. And they've, from different means, from the study of black holes, from the study of the way subatomic particles react and everything, the pictures that the scientists are getting is that the universe is a holographic projection, and we are parts of the whole. And incidentally, recall how I told you at the beginning that I came to the conclusion that the only way that I was able to understand what was happening so accurately with a person's physical or mental state was by the fact that I must have some connection with it. We must be part of the same whole. Well, that right there indicates the holographic nature of the universe, because the nature of a hologram is such that every minute part of a hologram contains the image of the whole. You can take a hologram and slice it and dice it into a million pieces, and each of those little pieces will contain the image of the whole.
So we're all on the same page. Would you mind explaining subatomic particles?
Well, everybody is probably familiar with atoms and molecules, but there is a level, and it's crazy because they're discovering new ones every day, but there is a level of particles that are below that form the foundation of atoms and molecules. So atoms and molecules can be further reduced into various subatomic particles, and each of these plays, seems to play, different roles and different things, and it can get a little confusing.
I'm sorry, they're still considered physical.
Yeah, they're still considered physical, but here's the thing. Ultimately, when they examine the nature of these subatomic particles, what they find, and this is almost like a direct paraphrase from Max Planck, who was the founder of modern quantum physics. Max Planck said, "I can assure you, at the very basis of everything, there's no such thing as matter. Matter is a vibration that is brought to bear by a supreme mind or a supreme intelligence to give physical appearances. So at the very basis of reality, there are no particles. What there is what exists are energy fields, waves of energy waves, and they've demonstrated this in various experiments. It's called particle wave duality. That particles and energy waves, sometimes they can manifest as waves, sometimes they manifest as particles, and energy waves can collapse their energetic state into particle form, into like sort of pinpoint particle form. Human observation, the human mind, seems to have a lot to do with collapsing the quantum wave, collapsing the energy wave into particle form that can form physical objects. So I know it can get a little mind-blowing and hard to understand, but we can't just look at particles. It really is just completely physical in and of themselves, because they are both physical and energetic.
So they're kind of the bridge between the two?
Yes.
Okay. So if we
the real bridge between the two is the human mind. The human mind seems to be the receiver and transducer that translates energy waves into particle forms. And consciousness is what seems, and incidentally, this is what spirituality has been saying for many years, but a growing number of scientists are starting to believe that the real bridge is consciousness. And human consciousness plays a role in translating those energy, that pure energy, that light energy, into particle form.
So, which leads me to this question. You have all of our senses, right? In your case, 6 of them. But all of the senses, um, are they just reading these waves and particles and then translating them metaphorically into the reality that we perceive?
Well, it's really more the mind that is doing that. The senses are actual physical apparatus in order to experience or have the experience of the illusion of existing in a three-dimensional, material world. That's why the physical senses, and that's why traditional science can never explain the mysteries of life, because traditional science is limited to what is observable what is material and what is observable. And insofar as that goes, yes, they've been able to accomplish a lot of things technologically and everything else. But to answer the deeper questions of life, what's this all about? Why are we here? Who are we? Where do we come from? How does the world really operate? What's really fundamental reality as opposed to apparent reality? Traditional science can never answer that with their material limitations, because at the heart of the matter, it's not material, it's energetic, it's consciousness.
So if that indeed is the case, and we get that figured out, what difference does it make? How is that going to serve us? How is that going to reframe our way of perceiving reality?
Well, I think it gets to the point that if you operate with more than your physical senses, if you develop an intuitive sense that is connected to the more fundamental reality, it helps you navigate your life. I mean, with me, it changed the course of my life and certainly helped me in my business. Helped me be successful in my business. It saved my life on a number of occasions by having premonitions. It's been documented in Chicken Soup for the Soul about my experience in Africa and how these premonitions saved my life. And I guess the best way to explain that is an analogy. Okay, you can live your life in the basement. You can eat, sleep, drink, have sex, and whatever, or you can move up to the penthouse. When you move up to the penthouse, you get a much more panoramic view of what's going on around you and what things are about. And the more information you have to work on, the more successful that you can make your life.
That makes sense to me. Okay, so if we're having how long do you see it until we're able to incorporate this into our lives rather than just ignore it because we don't think it exists?
Oh, well, that's a tough question, because it all boils down to individuals. I mean, different people have different focus in their lives, and will arrive at various states of consciousness. I mean, as a general movement, I do see that science is starting to change, and that's a big thing. Science
Well,
is start science.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to pick up on this on the other side of a station break. Peter and I will be right back to continue this discussion, so stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. I've been broken, shattered, cast to the wind. I am scattered upon the wind. I've been broken, shattered, cast to the wind. I am scattered upon the wind. I've been broken, shattered. What, oh, what is universal DNA? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing spirituality, consciousness, information, and reality is Peter Canova. His website, petercanova.com. Peter, there's the question. What is universal DNA?
Well, as I explained, universal DNA is the information that is inherent in the subatomic particles and particles, excuse me, that comprise our universe. The fact that elements form in very specific patterns. Hydrogen is different from, iron and so forth. But the fact that these keep repeating repetitively shows that the subatomic particles act like a DNA in order to create those forms and replicate those forms over and over again, the same way that the DNA of our bodies replicates our physical forms.
So, how does the universal DNA relate to our personal DNA?
It's the basis of forming the physical world that we experience.
So, how is our DNA changing? Is it changing during these intense times that we're undergoing right now?
I'm not an expert on DNA, but I know that people like Bruce Lipton have investigated fields called epigenetics, and they show how actually consciousness can actually control the DNA. It can actually unwind the strands of DNA and activate inactive portions of our DNA. So how we think, how our level of consciousness can actually have a the physical effect and seems to control the actions of DNA.
And so, would you mind? What's the relationship between DNA and information?
Well, it is information. DNA is a coded form of information. The information has to manifest itself in some form. We talked about how in a computer it's binary zeros and ones of photon flows through the computer transistors that give the images of the computer. DNA basically is that physical expression of the information, the energetic vehicle of the information being conveyed.
So let's tackle consciousness. Would you define it as we'll be speaking of it here?
Well, consciousness, I mean, in its very fundamental sense, consciousness is awareness. It's awareness and experience of the things that surround it. It's the ability to reflect. It's the ability to understand. But at a more fundamental level, it's also the ability to create. So, if you look at the ancient texts, they all say that it was a universal intelligence. And again, you can call it God or whatever you want, supreme intelligence, that there was an intelligent foundation of consciousness behind the creation of the material world. So consciousness is not only experiential, but it can create the things that it experiences.
So that's what you mean when you say consciousness and information are the foundations of reality?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
If consciousness and information are the foundations of reality, can we use them to alter reality? And if so, how do we do that?
Well, we are part of that conscious information stream. So I liken it, if you understand what a power grid is, like a national power grid or local power grid, you have your source energy, which is high energy, and it has to be stepped down in order to be utilizable, by people. So it goes through relay stations, and then from relay stations or sub transmitters, it steps down until finally you can use it in your home. Well, basically, we're kind of like those substations or relay stations of consciousness. We're part of that conscious energy stream. We are part of the supreme consciousness that had created everything. We're small bits of it. And to the extent that we change our consciousness, and particularly where we change our consciousness in a unified manner, and what did Jesus say? I'm trying to remember the quote. Where there are more than
Whenever
one.
two, yeah,
Yeah,
whenever two or more of you are gathered in his name.
exactly.
Hmm.
I mean, that was a statement right there that, when your consciousness merges in a good way, and it becomes more universal, like the 100 monkey theory, things catch on like fire and the memes start, catching on in general. That's when things really start to change. So, it's an iterative process going through individual minds, but hopefully collectively what happens is you get enough critical mass of a higher consciousness that you really start to get some real visible changes in the world.
And that's what we're really hoping for. A lot of people talk about these particular times as well, as we move into the age of Aquarius and the frequencies that relate to it, as a time of increased consciousness. Is there any evidence of that?
I think the greatest evidence of that is what we've talked about in the scientific world. I mean, there is such a thing as scientific orthodoxy, and it's every bit as stifling as religious orthodoxy. I mean, you can get into serious trouble, career-wise, financially, being ostracized, and so forth at one time for expressing anything that indicated that there was a belief in a higher intelligence. Right now, we see a gigantic movement of science and philosophy towards the basic understanding that consciousness is the foundation of everything. It's the foundation of creation. There's a movement is picking up steam in the scientific circles called panpsychism, and it has various forms and nuances, but essentially it's the recognition that there is consciousness present in everything, and it's consciousness that creates the appearance of the material world. That is largely the result of findings in quantum physics over the past few decades. But 30 years ago, if you mentioned something like this, goodbye to your job.
Yeah, don't buck the system, right? So here's something we've been pondering for a long time. What happens to consciousness at the point of the physical body dying?
Well, consciousness, since consciousness is foundational, consciousness continues. The physical form may change, but consciousness continues on. It may take other forms. It may take other physical forms. It may take energetic forms. It may take forms, operating at frequencies that we don't completely understand, or it may remain as pure energy. And usually, what the spiritual texts of, and people like Edgar Casey have told us is that the consciousness, may come back here for whatever reason, may reincarnate in Earth, but it also may go off to other realms of existence as part of a kind of learning or schooling experience, the goal of which is to get closer to the consciousness that produced us in the first place.
So we were trying to get back to where we started.
Pretty much.
Well, it's got to be better than what we see around here sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we're talking about this universal consciousness, and then we talk about human personality, okay, what we identify with while we're alive on this planet, how much of that personality transcends the transition from human physical body to pure consciousness?
Well, I mean, I can't say exactly, but what I do believe is that there's a tone or a vibration around each soul, and that that is not necessarily the same as personality. However, the physical experience that you have in this material plane, which we call personality, can certainly be one component to add to that eternal vibration of the soul on its journey. So I'm not saying they're synonymous, and I'm not saying personality is completely determinative of soul vibration or soul experience, but I do believe it makes a contribution.
And speaking of soul vibration, if we come with this, this consciousness, this soul vibration when we incarnate this time, then we go through conditioning and damage and this and that, and we do disconnect from part of it, don't we?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's. I think most people, generally speaking, understand the concept of the soul. How many people really experience the conscious potential that the soul really has in any individual lifetime is probably a lot more limited, but possible. It all boils down to focus. What you dwell on is what you tend to attract. What you dwell on is what you tend to become and understand. So, if you're focusing and dwelling on a higher vibration, if you're the type of person who believes there's something more out there, who wants to learn, who has an open mind, you will attract, let's say, better things, if I could say it in that way.
We're all in the same soup. However, if we don't believe in something, does it simply become invisible to us?
Um, well, I mean, if you don't believe in something, you just don't experience it. I guess you could say it becomes invisible, but what you don't believe in, you don't tend to experience. And experience is really what it's all about. I mean, we came to this world to experience. I always say that we're the fingers of God touching the face of this world, and our purpose is to spiritualize the material, but bring the experience of the material back to spirit. We are a bridge. The more that you're ignorant of that, and you just go through life kind of blowing around like a leaf in the wind, day to day, working your job, doing whatever, and you don't think of anything else, then you don't really experience the full breadth of life and the meaning of life that you really could.
So, what's the mechanism, those of us that would like to connect to more of our original spirituality, our original soul, the original consciousness that we possibly carried when we started to come in? What's the mechanism that we use to do that?
Well, I don't think there's any single mechanism, because people can arrive at higher consciousness by many different means. I think that there's several elements that are involved here. One is cultivating a desire, a strong desire to understand that there is something greater than what we believe to be reality. Now, in my case, I guess I was just born with just questioning. I mean, I felt a sense of alienation all the time, even when I was very young, and I felt there was something wrong about this world, or something that wasn't really right. It wasn't really right in the appearance of it, and I always had this kind of inquisitive desire, and I think that perhaps was the door that opened up these experiences to me. Other people may have to go so far as to hit rock bottom. Drug addiction, alcohol, thinking of suicide, just their life is so destroyed that they only have two ways to go, up or down. And when they go up, they usually are striving for a different experience. And in that striving, and in that emotional state of trying to pick themselves up and save themselves, it can lead to an experience with higher consciousness. You start to study, you start to read, you start to look around, you start to have a more open mind, you start to believe that, I'm starting to feel there's something else out there, it may save me. There's many different roads that can lead, or paths that can lead to experience with higher consciousness.
Well, it's time for us to take yet another station break. Please stay with us as Peter and I continue to explore the underpinnings of reality. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
Brilliant feathers of an unearthly hue glide by on the edge of his dream. A whisper of touch.
Conscious or unconscious? That's the question. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Peter Canova. His website, petercanova.com. Peter, in speaking about consciousness, and there's supposed to be an opportunity for us at this time in our history on the planet to gain higher consciousness. Is that indeed the fact? And why is that possible now?
I guess that would be true when you think of the fact that there are so many distractions that pull us away from consciousness. So I don't know, I guess if I can imagine ancient times when there was a lot more poverty, starvation, warfare, slavery, and so forth. Clearly those are things that detract people from an understanding of higher power. Not all the time, because obviously we had some very deep and profound mystery schools and spiritual thought back in those days that are probably even superior to what we had today, like the Gnostics that I cited. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to say if any individual age offers more opportunity than others. I guess the only thing I would say is that, as we've talked about, now that we do have science, and now that we do have quantum science in our hip pocket, perhaps if people connect the dots, as we're talking about here, between spirituality and science, using one to validate the other, perhaps that spurs more people on to an understanding of the potential for understanding consciousness.
Well, we're in a time of rapid information exchange, right? The information highway. Do you think that is playing any role here? How's that affecting it?
I think both ways. I think it can have both a positive and negative effect, just, like anything else in life can. It depends on how it's used and how it's focused.
So we started the whole conversation with how a lot of the information out there is not true information. It's lying with the truth, and that's when it's at its best. Um, as what a person starts to gain more consciousness, how do they then relate to information? Are they able to tell when something is not necessarily true?
Yeah, I think when you get to a certain level, your intuition just kicks in and tells you and said, no, this sounds like BS to me. Something you might have normally accepted, just doesn't ring true to you anymore. I mean, there's way too many people that believe what they read and hear in the news, and the news. I'm telling you, I mean, I hardly listen to it anymore. It's just out and out lying in most cases, and slanting, and looking for more for ratings than it is for truth. The news stopped being impartial and truly informative a long time ago, if it ever was. But I do think I do think people develop better what I call BS meters, in effect, and to filter out things that just don't resonate well.
If we're gaining more consciousness, and yet some other people seem to not be necessarily on that path. How does this relate to? How do we then relate to each other? What trend is going? Are we going into separate courts whenever the two shall mix?
It sometimes seems that way, doesn't it? I think that if you have an understanding of the operations of consciousness, you start to look at the mundane things of this world, the politics and everything, all the conflict that goes on. You start to see it in a different way. So, for instance, somebody who doesn't really have the same philosophy as you, or will go about doing the same things as you don't necessarily in your mind castigate them as being evil. You say, well, you know what, they're playing a function, and I can see their function. And in some ways that function is negative, but in other ways that function, is positive. A lot of people criticize different political figures, and they say, oh, this person's no good. They're a communist, they're a fascist, whatever the case may be. But they all play a role in furthering the movement of human history. And to the extent that we have consciousness, we start to develop discernments maybe about how a person may not necessarily be the best person in the world, but they may be playing a certain positive role in the movement of human history.
Let's talk a little bit about polarization, because it seems like the news and everything else is designed to, and politics and everything else, to polarize individuals. And if a person gets really polarized, it's almost like you can watch their IQ dropping. How does polarization fit into this whole thing of consciousness?
Yeah, I think accepting any ideology, hook, line, and sinker, and starting to view people on the other side of your belief system as being evil, worthless, whatever, is certainly detracts. Again, like I say, it's a matter of developing discernment. Look, I have certain political views, probably like everybody else has, but I don't view everybody involved in the opposite points of view that I have as being, evil or stupid. I can see when I feel they're being manipulative, and I understand that. But then again, at times, I also see the positive role that they may play, because we don't want all of anything. I mean, that's you want a little bit of controversy. You always want some opposition, or when you see opposition, you can help discern what the truth is by seeing how the opposites clash and how the opposites attract. So yeah, but if you kind of just buy into it and give over to the emotional part, the hatred and everything else, that's certainly negative.
And very crippling, in my opinion. So is it important? How important is it that we recognize that we really don't know, that we really don't encompass all the answers?
Oh, I think it's very important, because we don't. I don't. Nobody has all the answers. I think that if people just have a general sense that they really and truly want the best for others. Okay, so look, why am I doing what I do? Why am I on your radio show? Why did I write all these books? Because I'm a businessman, and it takes up a lot of my time. It takes up most of my time. But why did I do this? It's because something happened to me that changed the course of my life. And it made me realize that there was something out there, something better out there that we can relate to. And I wanted to help other people to think about it and to provide them some tools in order to be able to experience some of the things that maybe that I've experienced, and expand their sense of what reality is about. If we all had an attitude of essentially, trying to work for the best for people, and that was a real feeling. I mean, a real intrinsic feeling that we cultivated, not just words. I think that would be very helpful. Unfortunately, most of the political philosophies that I've seen in life that sound great and talk about brotherhood, fraternity, equality, it's all manipulation. It's manipulation because at the end of the day, it all ends up being controlled by certain cadres.
So when we're talking about, you just mentioned the life-changing event, and I know sometimes it's referred to as like an initiatory illness, or you also mentioned when we first started talking about how sometimes people have to reach rock bottom before they can start on the path of consciousness. Is there a certain amount of shattering of our old reality that's necessary for us to hook into the consciousness that's available?
Could you rephrase that question? I'm not sure I understood.
hmm in a lot of native traditions, they have initiatory ceremonies that shatter the person that's trying to become a medicine man or a shaman or a seer or whatever, depending on the nationality. Do we need to be shattered to a certain extent of the things that we hold on to, like sacred cows, our belief systems, in order to access more consciousness?
Okay, are you saying shattered or shadowed? I'm having a little trouble hearing.
I'm sorry, I'm saying shattered, broken.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying shadowed. Okay. Is it necessary? I would say no, not necessary. But does it happen frequently? Yes. Uh, I think. I mean, I guess it depends in the sense of what you're talking about. If you're talking about shattering old beliefs that are holding you back, for instance, if I had what I find about intuition is that it's more often or not dismissed in the same nanosecond that it arises because we're not used to listening to it. We're focused elsewhere. If you're talking about shattering that cocoon of a perception of material reality in order to see beyond it, then yes, I would agree to that extent that you do have to alter or change or discard old belief systems in order to propel you along your way to a higher consciousness.
Do you think that we set that up for ourselves just by our intention to evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that opposition is intrinsic in the very fabric of the universe and was there from the beginning, because the ultimate goal is that the one consciousness divided itself up into separate points of consciousness in order to have something to relate to, in order to have something to reflect upon itself, in order to have experience outside of itself. Because think of it for a second. I mean, if you're everything, how can you can be, but how do you experience? If you're everything, you encompass everything, how do you experience anything? Well, the only way you can do it is by limiting portions of your own consciousness and projecting them out. And essentially those become the mirrors of reflecting upon yourself. And essentially that's really what we are. We're projections in a material sense, in a soul sense, but also further on into a material sense, having a material experience here. And that experience has meaning that we bring up to our soul education, that we bring up to our soul, experience.
Well, we're just about to run out of time, Peter. Could you tell us what is your mission?
Well, it's like I said a little bit earlier, what I'm trying to do is simply to bring science and spirit together, show the interrelationships, and show people how to connect the dots in order to encourage them to develop their own consciousness, in order to encourage them to develop their own intuition. And using science and spirit, I do that from both a left brain and a right brain sense to appeal to those people that are already, let's say, a little bit more spiritually oriented and intuitively oriented, and give them some of the logic behind it. And then on the other hand, for people who are more logically oriented, to give them some of the translate some of the mystical experience behind it, but to show where the commonalities lie.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but Peter, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Mhm. Our guest this hour has been Peter Canova, the author of 25 times award winning First Souls of the Trilogy and his latest book, Quantum Spirituality. To find out more about Peter, where you can find his books and all he has to offer, visit his website, petercanova.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit missionevolution.org. But be sure to join us here next time as this mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to our evolving world.